The Dane and Derek Show is an uncensored, unfiltered podcast. Content warnings can be found in the episode description. Okay, we are recording. Go ahead and...
Okay.
All
I
right.
am speaking at a normal volume of voice.
Fantastic. We both look pretty good.
Cool.
So I'd say we just dive right in.
Yeah.
Cool. Here we go. Hello, and welcome to the Dane and Derek Show, a podcast where two nerdy friends attempt to keep in touch and shoot the shit. My name is Derek. I'm a writer, director, film person, an occasional D&D player, and with me as always is my good friend, Dane.
Hey, I'm Dane. I'm gonna forego my normal intro because I'm looking at our prep here, and it says here a shoot the shit podcast where two old ass friends catch up and talk about life shit and shooting the shit, which is funny. But I need to know. Here's the very important question I have. Does old ass refer to the amount of time you and I have been friends, or are we old ass people now?
The amount of time that we've been friends.
Okay, cool. Because I was about to be very, very offended, but I needed to check. Okay, cool.
It's funny because that's like at the top of every document, but I never read that. I think this is the first time that's been read on the show.
Fair enough. I like the intro you do better than this. But I just saw that and I needed to bring it out and I needed everybody to hear it.
Yeah. I think I leave it there as a reminder of what the show is at its core.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, you know what? I'm kind of looking forward to being an old ass dude. Like I think I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to that period in life.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll take those. Maybe I'll eat those words real hard in 30 years. But like for now, there's something
for
very
now.
idyllic about it.
Yeah,
But this is our third and final episode on Ma, isn't it?
correct. Ma and video games will be the topic. But
Mm-hmm.
before we dive in that, Dane, what's the third Miyazaki film you like?
I'm gonna cheat. Are you ready?
Okay.
Ni no Kuni: Wrath of the White Witch, which is a video game animated by Studio Ghibli.
Oh, wow. I was like, that sounds familiar, but I don't think it's a movie. So
Mm-mm.
but it is a video game. That I was correct in that it's not exactly a movie. But that's really that's a great that's a great pick for today. Tell
Hold
me about
on one sec.
Okay.
Sorry, my mic was falling down.
Go ahead and
Wait.
tell me about it, Dane.
So it is it's a JRPG turn-based combat. It's kind of Final Fantasy meets Pokemon a little bit. And Miyazaki himself didn't have like a really didn't have direct involvement with it. So in the same hand, I'll just also say Spirited Away. It's wonderful. It's amazing. It lives up to the hype. It deserves the Oscar, and it also deserved to be the number one highest grossing film in Japan of all time until like last month. But anyways, the video game itself centers around like a boy whose mother gets kidnapped by a witch, very Ghibli, and goes into sort of like a magical fantasy world in which to save her. And the game is actually very full of Ma, just by the fact of how the visuals are presented. Lots of open space, lots of moments in which to breathe and take in what's happening in the game. Um, yeah, yeah. What about you? What's your third and final pick?
My third and final pick is the it's a Ghibli film that we watched together actually in high school.
Hmm.
Kiki's Delivery Service. We watched it at Will's house that one,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not only was it a really like great film because it was like during our junior or senior year, one of those transitional periods, and so the
Mhm.
film really resonated with me. In addition to watching it with like all my friends, and there being some really good homemade Will Cordell pizza, I think. So
Yeah, I remember that. That was a nice afternoon, evening. It was
yeah,
good.
I remember being
Mhm.
very warm and very sunny, and maybe that's probably contributed to why I love the film. 'Cause I haven't seen the film in a long time, but I learned recently that there are two dubs of the film, and I'm
Mhm.
curious to watch both of the dubs and compare because I don't remember which dub we watched.
I don't either. Honestly, I didn't even know that. And I've watched Kiki's Delivery Service many times over the years, and I'm now suddenly like questioning, have I been watching the same movie different ways and just not noticing? Or
Yeah.
and I'll have to look into that. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. Huh.
So yeah, so jumping back to video games and Ma, what sort of thoughts do you have about Ma in video games, Dane?
So I have two thoughts. First off, I think Ma is difficult to achieve um, without doing it consciously in video games for a number of reasons. One, it's an interactive medium, and Ma is sort of. I don't think by definition. I don't think it's stillness necessarily, but it is not terribly active. So figuring out how to incorporate that feeling is very important. Um, well, I think it's important. I think it's more what I meant is I think it's difficult when you're conceptualizing something that someone is constantly interacting with, pressing buttons, thinking of, right? Like it's not like a painting in which the negative space, the breaths, it's just there all the time, and that because it's static and the nature of I think painting and a lot of visual arts really lends itself to Ma naturally because of its still nature. In the same way that I think poetry lends itself to Ma just because of the sparseness of the page, typically speaking.
Mhm.
So I think it's difficult. Definitely not unachievable in the same way that I think there are many books full of Ma and many films full of Ma. I think video games often have to pull the same tricks that film will do. You know, this is the moment you take the soundtrack away, or this is the moment where it's all soundtrack and there's no dialogue. It's um, all of those things. I also think that video games have a few extra tools that can make the moments of Ma super poignant and super strong when used properly. On the flip side, I think video games might suffer from the Hollywood blockbuster, the Michael Bay problem, even worse than films do. Um, and I'm curious if you agree with me on that. But I think there is a deep fear in the video game industry of losing players' attention and then putting it down the game forever. That you have to be constantly with it on them. Like I think of games like Doom 2016. That game does not stop. It just doesn't. Um, or like Call of Duty campaigns, like the single player campaigns. Holy shit! Like you're just going from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing. There's not a moment to breathe in those, and I think that a lot of that stems from a fear of boring people, which is kind of like as we've discussed over these weeks, the hesitation of Ma in particularly our culture, I think, comes from a fear of losing your audience. Um, so yeah, what are your thoughts before we start talking about like games that we think do Ma particularly well? I've already named a few I think do it poorly.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're right about how video games can suffer from the Michael Bay problem very quickly. I think because there's a lot of things going on the screen, there's a lot of visual noise.
Hmm.
And it that was something that I was like following this development of a video game, Hades actually, and something that they were always looking for was to make sure that there was visual clarity on the screen, that there wasn't too much noise when they were developing like new attacks and spells and sort of like boons. They wanted to make sure that you could still visibly understand it without getting caught up in that noise. And I think definitely because it's like it's an experience, it's an immersive experience. So you're no matter what game you're playing, you're pulled into a world where the game itself extends beyond the screen you're looking at, and so it can get really noisy really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
To that
Super
point,
agreed.
yeah. To that point, I think to list off some games that do Ma well, like Breath of the Wild or even KOTOR or uh, Bastion. Those are games where there are moments in which you can just kind of stop and observe what's going on, and you can invoke that stillness as well. But something that I really that in our conversations about like inhaling and exhaling with video games and consuming media, it occurred to me that perhaps Ma in video games is actually more of the intention to sit down and play the video game, and then the intention to put the video game down and get back up. Perhaps that's where the Ma is in the video game experience, going into the world and then leaving the world.
I feel like that is definitely a okay, I would agree with that in a very meta sense. I definitely think that like for a lot of people in their lives, me in particular, I think you as well, that sitting down to play a video game is a moment of ma in our lives for sure. Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm
It's
totally with you there.
another like weird form of it's like a not a weird form, but it's an alternative mod that comes with video games almost unintentionally,
Mhm.
in a weird way. But those are sort of my thoughts on it. I Your comparison to Michael Bay was really good. I think that that's a really good point about video games.
Yeah. So I have a quick list of some games that I think do this really well for a variety of reasons. Um I think Skyrim actually does Ma really well. All that time and space given to just like walking between points, especially early on when you can't fast travel that many
Mm.
places, or at best you can just get fast travel to like a place close and then you still have to do the walk. I think the walk is actually really important to that game. Uh, on top of that, this is also to some extent for Breath of the Wild. Uh, in Skyrim, your UI interface, your health bar, your mana bar, all that stuff, it kind of, if you play and you walk for a little bit, it vanishes if you don't need it. And I think that's a really important move because, like you're talking about that visual clarity when you're playing, right? Like, I think that was a really smart choice on their part to just be like, no, you don't need this, you don't need this, and we'll bring it back when you do. Um, I don't know how you play Breath of the Wild, but every time I play, I turn off all the user interface except for the hearts and the little stamina wheel. Um,
I didn't know you could do that,
yeah, you can
so
turn
I'm
off the
gonna look into
map, you
doing
can
that.
turn off all of it.
Huh.
And I loved doing that. It made my playtime jump by like 6 hours, don't get me wrong. But I really, really loved doing that. Um, it made me be in the moment so much more. And Breath of the Wild has the word breath in it. And I think that's for a reason. That game does
Mhm.
the Skyrim like Ma, like you have to journey and travel thing, like 7 or 8 times over. Like it's kind of like that thing that was so good in Skyrim, like honed to a razor's edge. So I think if you want to see a whole game based around Ma, I'd say play Breath of the Wild or play Journey by that game company.
Mm.
Journey is also a perfect, near perfect, in my opinion, representation of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. So lots to learn in that game. It's kind of a piece of art about art without being pretentious and still being like really beautiful and touching. So I'd say go play that one. I think you're right. Bastion does a really great job, and I would also argue Dark Souls does, simply because there's a lot of meditation required to get through that game. Lots of patience and lots of points of rest. You're always like the whole game is about jumping from points of rest to points of rest. Um, it makes you yearn for these moments of peace. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
actually give you Ma all that often, but the bonfires are, when you reach one, the absolute relief, the joy, and like the fact that they make the character sit down at them, I think is a really masterful use of it without the piece really being fully about it. Uh, I also want to point out I had some prep notes for our episode today, and I
Hmm.
just want you to know. Apparently, this is the episode where I talk about things written down. Because my phone autocorrects and does things, I don't have Dark Souls written. I have Dark Soups, um, like chicken noodle soups written, and it's just, and I couldn't bring myself to edit it. It's just too, it brings me too much joy. But also on my notes, if one would want to see an example of Ma used really effectively, followed up by a game that really, really could have used more of it within the same game, I actually have a really good example. Bioshock Infinite. Have you played it?
I've not played any Bioshock games, and I've heard really mixed things about Bioshock Infinite, so I'm curious now.
I have mixed feelings about Bioshock Infinite in the sense of I think, I'll just be honest, I don't think it's good overall in the end. I think it's very interesting as like a piece to examine. And I think that there are some moments in it that are very uh tense and well done. Um, but anyways, the game opens in the following way. I'll just give you a quick description. You arrive at a lighthouse. You are given a you're basically a private investigator. You are given a job. Go up to this weird flying city in the sky and bring back this particular girl. And then your debt is cleared. That's the whole premise. You go up in the lighthouse. Excuse me. Goodness. Um, you go up the lighthouse. You are taken up to the city in the sky, and then you're taken to this like terrifyingly bucolic and perfect version of like early 1900s Americana. That's almost eerie by how cheerful and perfect and happy everything is. And you walk through it for about 10-ish minutes. Um, and nothing goes wrong. There's not a lot of quote unquote gameplay. There's like things to find, and you can buy things and sort of listen in on conversations and stuff. And then you get to this like parade festival thing wherein like essentially people are going to stone an interracial couple. And then you are given your first choice in the game. You can choose to cast the first stone or rebel and I guess for take the do the quote unquote right thing. I have my problems with that scene. I don't think the game actually does racial anything that well actually, but the interesting thing about it is you never quite get to follow through on your choice because you are recognized as this like devil figure. At which point you are forced to enact some horrible violence. And and then the first gunfight of the game happens. And it's really intense and it's like this crazy thing because you went from this like hyper peace, all of this space into, and now we fight. And it's crazy and it's like really cool and you're like, wow, that was like really masterfully done. What a moment, what a scene. And then the rest of the game never does anything like that again. It is just this Michael Bay kind of endless string of gunfights and set pieces and action, and it never calms down enough again to ever hit any of its beats the way I think it needed to. Um, so like if you wanted to investigate something where you could see how Ma can be incorporated into something to really like hammer home this moment, like it made the violence all this more gut wrenching and awful. And the hate and all of it, like it really made it stick because first it let you breathe, followed by like entire game where it really, really needed to do that again. I think
Mm.
you should play Bioshock Infinite if you have like 12ish hours to kill on a game that I don't actually think is really worth your time. You know, like that sounds really silly. Like, but if you like, there are some pieces of artwork that I think are worth investigating and approaching because of their imperfections. You know,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
there are some pieces of work that I find are just like there is nothing here to really learn from. um Moving along, right? Like you should just kind
Yeah.
of like avoid them. And then there are pieces that I find that there's like, wow, something was here. There really was something here, and it's interesting to go in and try and learn from their failures, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
um and I think that's the best I can say about Bioshock Infinite, is I think it is a game that is worth your time to investigate if you are interested in doing that. But beyond it, I wouldn't waste your time. So
Good to know. Good to know.
yeah,
I don't own it, so if I see a sale where it's like handful of bucks, maybe I'll play it. But
yeah. I mean,
good to
if
know.
yeah, if you could get like Bioshock Infinite on Steam for $5, I'd say buy it. Play the first hour, hour and a half, and you'll totally get what I'm talking about. You'll totally
Gotcha.
see it. And I don't know if you'll fully agree with me or not. Like, art is subjective, but you know that would be, you would kind of get the gist of
Hmm.
the things that work and don't about it,
Gotcha.
in regards to Ma, at least. But yeah, that's kind of like one thing that I was really thinking about, is games that do it well and the ones that don't. And I think it has to do with gameplay. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big part of it because the games you described have very unique gameplay, right? Like Skyrim and Breath of the Wild are very open world adventure RPG where you
Hmm.
can make choices, but you are still a person in the world with a role. Um, we've talked about Bastion, we've talked about Bioshock Infinite, and those are stories where you play a character within a world that has a little bit more of a confined role
Yeah,
than
and there's a distinct character with like a name that you don't come up
yes,
with, etc. Yeah.
correct, yeah, and that's uh, a- and it's interesting how like at the end of the day, like they're different games, but they're all trying to do the same thing, trying to give you those moments. Heck, even like Dark Souls, it's considered like the epitome of like gaming of like gaming in terms of like difficulty, but it's also a game with a lot of ma in a weird way, like you
Hmm.
described. And I think that it does come down to the gameplay and how the developers allow the player to take moments for themselves, whether it's right after a big cinematic or while they're resting or in a dialogue option. I think there's a lot of places in games where developers can give the player the option to have ma, and I think that that's definitely important. um
Yeah,
yeah,
I think using Ma well requires you to understand that nothing is something, if that makes sense.
yeah.
Um, like I think like using Skyrim and Breath of the Wild as an example, the developers kind of on some level understood that what often seems like nothing, that the traversal between points is actually a lot of the game, and that it should be enjoyable on some level, or there should be something to it, right? Like
Hmm.
in Skyrim, I often find that the best moments of like swelling, soaring orchestral score actually happens in those like travel moments.
Hmm.
Um, and in Breath of the Wild, I think they kind of took it a step further by being like, no, the traveling really is the thing. Like, let's give them a glider. Let's give you like four different ways to like traverse the world a bit, such that like there's a sense of like this space where you're just kind of relaxing and you don't have to be focused on anything. You're not worried about something, you're not concerned, you're not trying to solve a problem, are truly enjoyable moments and don't feel like wasted time. Like I'm thinking about Breath of the Wild, and there is, on some level, there's nothing better in that game than jumping off of a very high point with your glider and going a very long way with it. You
Yep.
know,
Yeah.
like there is something about that that is deeply relaxing. Like it's like, because nothing's gonna get you. You know, you're fine. Everything is good, and we're just gonna glide for a while. And so I think it's really important to know, as a developer in this very fast-paced medium, that nothing is something, and you need to include it. You need to incorporate it, and you need to develop it as much as anything else. Um,
Mhm.
like, and I also think of like I'm thinking of like quote unquote like downtime moments also have an element of space and maw to them. Like let's use Hades for example. In Hades, the vast majority of your gameplay is like a roguelike action RPG basically. And it's lightning fast, hyperactive, bright colors popping in your face. Like it's a lot. It's beautiful and it's great and it's fun, but it's a lot. Um and then the other half of the game is when you're back in your house and you're talking to all your friends and family. And that part's also really, really fun, but it's not quote unquote gameplay as a lot of people think of it. Um, but they
Right.
developed it and it's really crucial to that game in the same way that Dragon Age typically does that too.
Yeah, the
Um,
campfire with all your party members.
Campfire with all your party members, or in Inquisition, it's when you're back at Skyhold, which, in my
Yep.
opinion, is the better half of the game, right? Like, uh, and so like I think you're also like you can also like kind of know if someone's like really taking care with their game. They may it may still not be that good, um, but someone's really trying. I think if they attempt to quote unquote develop the not gameplay parts of their game.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yin and yang. You got to have a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Agreed. I mean, if you think about it, like I will go back to Hades for this example. Like you still make gameplay choices um in there. Like you pick weapons, you can go practice with weapons out there, and you can still dash. Like there are still little bits of the main game, quote unquote main part of the game in it. And out in the world, when you're like doing your roguelike run, you can occasionally run into NPCs in rooms instead of enemies and have a little bit of the house out there.
Hmm.
And I think that is an excellent decision that you can see. There's that neither they're not fully separate. Um,
Yeah.
it leaves it feeling much more holistic as opposed to say Inquisition, where those two things are almost wholly separate, and it leaves it feeling a little disjointed in a sense.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, okay, real quick, what is like
Hmm.
the least maw-filled game you think you've ever played, like all the way through?
Ooh, least Mawfield game I've played all the way through. um, uh, there's this game called, I think it's called Paths of Destinies. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
5 hour game,
Mm-hmm.
and it's 5 hours because there's absolutely no breathing room. um, it was a fun time. I had a really good time, really great story, really great characters, but you basically play like a lovable swashbuckling pirate thief character that goes around trying to save the world, and you
Mm-hmm.
make all these choices, and then if you fail, this magical device you discovered in the in the beginning of the game like brings you back to that moment where you found it, and you get to start all over again and continue to make those same choices. Arguably, the maw in it is when you make your decisions, or when you are back and you get to decide like how you want to start your adventure again. But basically, like once you play through it only takes like, you know, half an hour to an hour per run of the game,
Hmm.
and um, there's really no room to breathe. It was a really fun game, but really no room to breathe and sort of just like let the characters rest and get to know the characters. Um, so that was probably the least Maw-filled game I've ever played. But the developer has a new game coming out next year or two, and I'm really excited about that. Um, so support indie games, but also, I slow down. How
Yeah. Yeah.
about you?
Um, I'm torn between Borderlands the pre-sequel and Borderlands 3. Um,
uh,
I enjoyed both of them, but that was mainly because I binged them with our good friend Will Cordell. Um, but yeah, there was no contemplative moment in either of those, and I'm just kind of left trying to decide which one is less. Um,
I don't think I've ever beaten a game like those looter shooters. I don't think I've ever beaten one of those games.
the first one's really interesting, actually. Like the second
Yeah,
one, they kind of hit their. I think they really hit their stride and really knew what they were doing. Um,
yeah.
and they had a couple quieter. They left some things in that let it be a little bit more balanced. But the first one's actually weirdly lonely.
Mm,
Like whenever I play it, I feel like this like deep sense of like sadness and like melancholy and emptiness that is not existent in the others.
interesting.
Um, and it's not in their like scripted stuff. Their scripted stuff is way more like the later games, but they're clearly working on like a much narrower budget and with greater limitations. Like there were not many characters or NPCs, especially NPCs that were friendly. Uh and there were these long stretches where you were just in this like kind of bizarre sci-fi western Mad Maxy sort of world, and there's this just quiet melancholy like music going,
Huh.
and it was like it's really cool. And there's a part of me that's like, I get why they did the other thing, because I think the other thing sells better, and I think the other thing is what they meant to do all along. But there's a part of me that just wants a whole game that is the other thing. Um,
Gotcha.
so yeah, Borderlands series definitely,
Huh.
definitely not terribly maw filled. But
Yeah, I only played the second one and didn't finish that one.
yeah, they're genuinely not for everybody.
Yeah.
And I then the third one came out the day it came out, and I started playing it. I wrote this like massive Twitter thread about why I still play it, because I was realizing, it's like it's never a game I would pick up today, and it's entirely nostalgia fueled, like 100%
Mm,
nostalgia fueled for a couple of reasons. Um which I won't get into here because we're starting to run low on time. And I
yeah.
want to ask final thoughts on Ma, because like this is it. This is the end of it. We've been here for 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. We've been here for 3 weeks, given everybody plenty of time in between each episode to ruminate on it.
Mhm.
Uh, I think Ma, in and of itself, it's like when you're reading comics. It's the space between the panels
Mhm.
in a way, and I think that there's like you gotta have it, and we all use it. We all do it. We all find ways to put it in our art and to have it in our lives.
Mhm.
But when you're intentional about it, I think I've learned from just our talks that there's ways to make things, I guess, there's ways to help you be a bit more in tune with what you're feeling through an effective use of Ma, whether it be gameplay or how you space your words or how you space out your action scenes. It's in all sorts of matters. It all goes towards helping you feel something on a much more deeper level. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree with you about the fact that like Ma is going to exist on some level in your work, just because I think regardless of if you think it's this exact term and this exact definition, like you said, if you're doing a comic book, there will be spaces between your panels. If you're writing music, it will not be an endless drone of notes. And honestly, if you do actually make like a computer generated drone, that is going to become your sort of your nothing, your baseline. So you're not going to escape it anyway, right? Like it's
Hmm.
going to be there. Um, and so I think about it as this: you can choose to like how much wants to be there, and when you're like you're saying, when you're being conscientious about it, you have much more control over how much Ma actually is in your work or not. Like, I think of Star Wars A New Hope. It's got some Ma in there for sure, some really great moments. Luke looking at the twin sunsets, for example. Wow, very if you ask me, a near perfect moment of Ma. But after the adventure gets going, it doesn't really slow down all that much. It's not really there, but it feels like it was controlled. Choices were made. Um,
Yeah.
and so, what I think it is regardless of how you want to think about Ma, if you're making work, you should know how to use it. It's a tool in your tool belt, and you should be. If you ask me, you're leaving something on the table if you ignore it. You're talking about how it like adds to the emotional like level of things, right?
Hmm.
Well, like what if you left out a score in a film?
Exactly.
I mean, that's a choice. You could do that, and maybe that would be a really good choice. But if you're not, if you left out a score because you didn't even think about it, um, and so the sound of your movie is only ambient noise of the theater and your dialogue and whatnot, that's you might be missing out. You might be missing out on something, right? And I think
Yeah.
Ma is the same way. If you're working with it, well, of course you can get more emotion out of your work. You're using another tool that you can't fully get out of your work anyways. You're just making use of it. Um, so there's just more emotional impact to have, right? Like, and so And my other final thought about it is, I just, if this doesn't come through yet, like clearly I'm not communicating well. I really love Ma filled work. I really do. Um, and so I'm constantly working to find it and to have it in my own work. And I would really recommend to people, go find it. Like, go find it, and don't think about nothing as nothing. See what's trying to be said in the spaces. I really think you'll be surprised how much is really there.
I think that's as good a way of any to end our series on Ma. I think that's a really beautiful way to look at it.
Thanks. I mean, maybe a better way would just to be like to end it. I don't know.
That'd be,
Before yeah, we can't, because it's a pod, so you don't want to leave people hanging. It'd be weird, but like,
it's just like 5 minutes of silence. Then it's like, okay, folks, well, that's it.
well, this has been,
Well, uh, Dane, it was wonderful talking to you about Ma this week, but we are out of time. Um, yeah. Uh, so that's it, everybody. Thanks for listening and hanging out. Next week, we'll be back again with something probably nerdy.
probably,
Um,
probably.
we'll figure it out then. Uh, so, yeah. You can see what movies I'm watching on Letterboxd at Benig-Aiello, and you might notice that if you're looking at this, that I've seen Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, and there's a lot of Ma in that movie, surprisingly. And that's all I'm gonna say. Plug in Tokyo Drift, go watch it.
Okay,
Dane, where,
I have an admission to make. I've never seen a single Fast and Furious movie.
then you just gotta watch Tokyo Drift. Just watch Tokyo Drift, man. It's so good. There's like so much good Ma when they're drifting. There's these moments where it's like a big inhale right before like they like cut away to something else, and it's like, whoa, you really felt that, and it's beautiful. You should watch just Tokyo Drift.
Just Tokyo Drift, but I thought, hmm.
It's unrelated to the first two, and technically it's like the eighth one in the series,
Okay,
chronologically speaking.
okay,
So
that's confusing.
it's the
Um,
third one in the trilogy, eighth one in the series.
I find that deeply confusing. But you can find me on Twitter at Dane_Fogdoll, which you could try and explain to me the Fast and the Furious mythology and lore. Or you can listen to my show Diceology, which is like the science of dice, on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify.
Alrighty, folks. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time.
Catch you later.